Welcome to another edition of Radio Influencers, a podcast series we're doing for Radio Update. And my guest here today is Marc Greenspan with Research Director. How you doing, Marc?
I'm doing great, Andy. How are you doing?
Good. I've been excited to have you on because of this. I want to talk to you about this new Nielsen change that everyone's talking about, the 5 minutes to 3 minutes. But before we get into all that talk, can you kind of tell them your radio origin story, how you got into this business?
Yeah. So I grew up on Long Island, New York, and that's how we say it. If you're from Long Island, you grew up on the island. And I'd call what I grew up in a radio household. My father, he had a transistor radio sitting on the towel rack in the bathroom every morning. Used to commute into the city every day on the train, and he would listen to the radio. He'd listen to, I think it was 880 CBS, which unfortunately, rest in peace.
Yeah.
To hear about the train schedules and everything that was going on. And it's just something I got used to. So I grew up listening to music on AM radio. I remember falling asleep with a clock radio that had a timer on it. And, I even remember them reading the names of the soldiers in Vietnam that were announced that day as killed in action. When I was a teenager, I used to help my friends install car stereos because the cars came with crappy radios and we all wanted better sound in our cars.
Got to upgrade
it. So I actually learned a lot about cars and doing a lot of stuff by putting in these car stereo systems. And basically I've loved radio continuously through my teen and college years. And fortunately for me, when I graduated from George Washington University with an engineering degree, I got the opportunity to work at Arbitron as a product manager. And I was put in charge of the Arbitron service. At that point, it had just been released, and we were basically the first company that was delivering data over a modem to a PC computer. And I thought it was a really cool opportunity. I learned a ton, and I really loved working with our clients at radio stations across the country because of how I had grown up.
Yeah, and the at what point were you there when Nielsen came in?
No, I was only there for 4.5 years in the 80s.
Can you walk me through a few of the tools you guys have at Research Director that help radio stations analyze their Nielsen ratings? Because I know you guys really specialize in this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, everybody listening to this podcast knows about the challenges that we face today. All local media, newspaper, TV, radio, we're all facing challenges. And I really believe the radio audience still has tremendous value to local businesses, but we need to be better at telling that story in order to win over more advertisers. So Research Director has a variety of tools. Some of them are automated. Some of them are produced by experienced data professionals. We're actually sitting there creating the slides for them. We spend a ton of time making sure that the tools we're using for each client match what that client needs. So it's frustrating and time consuming for radio teams to try to make strategic decisions without having data that's analyzed and organized to provide unique and valuable insights that guide those decisions. So we're working with our clients in two areas. We have programming research and sales research. We have something we call Programming and Ratings Toolbox that helps programmers save time and gives them the granularity they need to understand pretty much everything about why their Nielsen ratings changed. Our reports are delivered within minutes of the Nielsen data release. You don't have to spend time running dozens or hundreds of tap scan reports or other reports because we're delivering it all to you. The sales solution service, that helps sales teams demonstrate the value of each station's audience. We produce the collateral materials that salespeople can use. It's based on either the Nielsen audio quantitative data, but most of it's based on qualitative stories from Scarborough, from Media Audit or MRI Simmons. Really, whatever kind of qualitative data the station has access to, we'll end up using. And really, we're just demonstrating the power of radio as well as the value of each station's audience to a particular advertiser or business category.
So you really break down. I mean, it can be a lot of overwhelming amount of data for radio stations, and I've been that guy spending that entire day kind of going through it and figuring out trying to get the story out of it. So you guys just really help break it down for them.
Yeah, and again, it arrives organized so that because the first thing you're sitting there saying is, okay, my share went from a zero point 0.5 to a 0.8 or a 4.5 to a 6.2. Why? So the first thing you got to do is look at, okay, well, which day parts were better? Which demos were better? We're laying that all out for you. And again, it shows up within a few minutes of when the Nielsen data becomes available to you. So you're not sitting around stressed out waiting to find out those answers when you have TapScan available to you. We've already done it.
Yeah. Any other tools you guys have that can empower a local account executive, local sales manager to sell more local direct advertising?
Yeah, so one of our most valuable services is that we create decks for specific advertisers. We call them client-specific presentations, or inside here we call them CSPs for short. So let's say you're trying to convince a local business to work with your stations. You call us up, or we have a portal where you can put in a request, and we create a deck with research showing why your audience is a great match for that advertiser. And this is enabling your sales teams to become marketing resources to your prospects and clients. You don't just want to be in there selling spots. You want to be in there with the advertiser selling solutions to what their problems are, and becoming a marketing resource to them is part of that solution.
Yeah, I really like that. I like the customization of that. So in last week's Radio Update newsletter, we asked the poll question, how do you feel about Nielsen's 3 minutes instead of 5 for quarter hour listening change? We had 2,100 responses, 2,158, but it was pretty evenly split. So 49% said it was good for radio, and 51%, slightly more, said it was bad for radio. Which side do you land on, and why?
So I feel like on balance, this is good for radio. I'm actually surprised to hear you say that the audience or the respondents were so split on that. First thing is, keep in mind, this only applies to PPM markets. I'm not totally sure why, but I'm assuming that's because diaries don't have that many entries that are 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 4 minutes.
Right.
The listening entries in a diary are typically 90 minutes or more, so maybe it wouldn't help in the diary, but obviously the PPM's picking up actual listening duration. So what Nielsen is saying is that something like 23 to 28% of the listening events, or the total listening, I'm sorry, is for less than 3 or 4 minutes in a given quarter hour. So how does that affect us? I mean, in terms of additional revenue, rates aren't based just on ratings. They're based on supply and demand. I'm not really sure how much impact this is going to have on rates. But even if the rates don't increase, this change has the positive effect of making radio more affordable when you compare it, like the CPP or the CPM. They're going to go down compared to other media. And all of a sudden, radio is going to look like more of a bargain. So even if we don't get higher rates, we maybe can get a bigger share of the pie because it's more cost effective to reach the audience that we're actually delivering. That's another thing to keep in mind, is that this is audience that we are actually delivering that was not being reported before.
Right. So in your opinion, you think it's going to make it a little bit more accurate?
So I don't know if accurate is the right thing. Fair might be a better word to use.
Right.
I mean, every media has a currency. Like if we talk about digital impressions, if a website gets served, whether you see that ad or not, that counts as an impression, and people are paying per impression. Even if somebody scrolls through, let's say they're on a phone scrolling through their news feed and they pass through an ad, that's an impression. So every media has its own intricacies to the measurement. And I think the fact that you can get credit for an impression that somebody just scrolled by at 30 miles an hour for half a second, that counts as an impression. But somebody listening to a radio station for 3 or 4 minutes, that doesn't count as an impression. I just think it makes it more fair.
Well, and that's what, until I really started to get into the digital stuff, there were so many questions I didn't know to ask that I do now know to ask, like what's your bounce rate? Above, I knew, obviously I knew the above the fold, not above the fold, but, it can't, like you said, it counts as an impression, but they may only be on that website for 10 seconds. So what are the ads they're going to, what are the odds they're going to see every ad on that website? But so, back to the 3 minutes to 5 minutes, and you said something in there about CPM that kind of jumped out at me, because radio has been a pretty good CPM wise. I do think we stack up really well with a lot of other media.
I agree, and again, if all of a sudden our CPM goes down by whatever the inverse of 25% is, I mean, I guess it's 20. It would be like a 20% lower CPM for the new audience that we're reporting. Then how can that hurt us? It's got to be good,
Do you think it's going
especially
to?
for these platforms that use all this data to analyze, make basically planning and buying decisions.
Right. Do you think it's going to affect certain formats more than others? Get kind of putting on your programming hat.
Well, I mean, according to Nielsen, they have said that the younger skewed formats seem to benefit a little bit more. And it's not like it's 10% more, it's a few percentage points more. And I mean, based on the response, I take it they didn't go back and ask the individuals. But it seemed like the inference was, well, younger people just have more of these 3 and 4 minute listening events than
Right.
older people do. Just it's they have this saying that all generalizations stink, which is a generalization in and of itself. But that's what they're basically saying, is that younger people tend to have more of these shorter listening
Well,
events.
I always say, some things are cliche for a reason. That there's something behind it. I mean, CHR, hot AC, country, a lot of the formats that lean younger have higher QM and less TSL. So it it would make, or higher AQH and less TSL. So I could see this affecting certain formats a little bit more. But like you said, it's probably going to be small percentage points, not a huge amount.
Yeah, it's definitely single digits based on what Nielsen showed us.
As a consultant, I've seen many examples of multiple people within a radio group looking at the same Nielsen data and coming away with vastly different conclusions. One thing I would see is that people would kind of fit it to the narrative they already had in their mind of what the station would do. How can groups get on the same page when interpreting Nielsen data?
I mean, it's an interesting question, and I don't know if this is intentional or unintentional, but you know, with any data, people can use it to find what they're looking for, and they actually have a term for it. It's called confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that's arbitrary; that it's been studied and it has an official name. So, in terms of sales, advertisers just want to reach potential customers, and every station has listeners that can provide value for specific advertisers. Uh, so obviously, certain stations' audiences might be better. Like I might have more of the people who plan to buy cars, but it might be a smaller percentage of my overall audience. So I might not be as efficient as another station that has a higher percentage of their audience that's planning to buy cars in the next year, if that's what the qualitative category is.
Mm-hmm.
But those would be different ways of spinning the same data to tell different stories. Do you want efficiency or do you want quantity? Do you want to reach more people? Well, it depends on the goals of the advertiser. So, in terms of using ratings for programming, the real value, you have to start off knowing what changed in the ratings, but the real value is to know why the ratings changed. And there's tools available to do that. If you're using those tools, then you'll be able to make hopefully more mutually acceptable decisions.
Well, and that kind of answers another pain point. Not to make it all about me, but as a consultant, one thing we're always trying to keep groups or stations from overreacting to Nielsen data and having those knee-jerk reactions. The way I always say it is, you're
Right.
looking for trends, not like something that's happening in a single book. Do you have any secrets for how to keep them from overreacting?
I mean, again, it all comes down to an understanding, not just what changed in the ratings, but try to understand why they changed. So we break the explanation for why your ratings change into four main segments. Something changes on your station, something changes on another station in the market, something's going on in the market that disrupts typical listening patterns, like Christmas music. We all know the impact that that has on normal listening patterns. When a
Hmm.
sports team is doing well, that affects normal listening patterns. Special news or weather events going on in your market, that
Election
could
year, news talk. Yeah.
that's a perfect example, absolutely. And then the fourth is that something changed in the Nielsen either meter or diary panel. I use the word panel. Uh, so if you're going to make confident decisions, understanding which one of those four caused the ratings change is really important. Uh, in PPM markets, we know that most stations have a few heavy meters that provide an overwhelming percentage of their total AQH. And I'm not here to judge whether that's good or bad, but the power is in knowing that these meter keepers exist in your ratings, uh, who they are, who else they're listening to. It's also important to know how long they've been in the panel so you can sort of predict when they're going to be forced out, because you're supposed to be like 24 to 26 months, you're going to be forced out. If you're not forced out earlier for some other reason, we actually had a station who lost one of their heaviest meter keepers because somebody else in the house wasn't cooperating. They call it cooperating. If you carry the meter, you don't have to listen, you just have to carry the meter. So the household got pushed out of the panel, not because their heavy listener was doing something wrong, but because somebody else in the house was doing something wrong, and the household was kicked out of the panel early. Uh, you know, Most of this is out of the control of the stations,
Sure.
but I think what programmers need to focus on is just having as many heavy listeners in the real world as they can. And then they have to hope that several of them get contacted by Nielsen and that they agree to participate in the survey. So that's the part that's in your control. Putting together good content that has enough of these heavier listeners that they can be included in the research. And we have a package of tools that actually help you figure out uh, as much as possible who these heavy meter keepers are. We're calling it our powerful precision marketing service, and it can provide a lot of specific information. We don't know who the exact meter keeper is, but we can provide a lot of demographic and geographic information about who those meter keepers are for you and also for your competitors. And what that lets you do is focus on hyper-targeted marketing campaigns. You're going to want to try to protect your heavy meters. You're going to want to see if you can try to persuade the heavy meters for your competitors. Uh, you're just trying to get them to give you a try. And granted, not every meter is going to be persuadable in that way, but this information is being used quite effectively by several of our clients.
Well, I like that approach because, the one thing, the more you look at this data, the more you realize like you said, the outsized impact. I call them super listeners or super fans. But one thing I've told many groups and stations over the years that when you're on air, it's really easy to get annoyed by these people because they call you all the time. They show up at every single event. They win every prize. We'll call them prize pigs. And so it's real easy to be short with those folks and get annoyed with them. But those are the people most likely to
Correct.
agree to carry a people meter or to fill out a diary in a diary market. So you really want to do everything you can to keep those folks happy and listening and not lose them to a competitor, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's true whether we had this rating system or some other kind of system.
Yeah. And so I really like that Hot Topics blog you guys have on the website. And in one of the recent ratings roundup blogs, you guys talked about how the usual suspects tend to end up at the top of the ratings leaderboard book after book. I have my opinion on why this happens. Why do you think it's so hard for stations to take down a market leader? Why do the same stations end up coming in number one book after book?
So yeah, as you said, we do monthly a ratings roundup for the top 20 markets. If anybody's interested in signing up, they can come to our website and sign up for the blog. Uh, you know, the bottom line is that consumption of radio, it's not that different than the consumption of any other product like laundry detergent or dish soap. And like if you're working at a consumer packaged goods, CPG is easier to say, company, they invest a ton in their brands to try to make the brands strong. The strongest radio stations understand that, and they understand the power of their brand. They focus on trying to generate loyalty and recognition of the brand. I mean, it's not as important today in a PPM market, at least, that somebody remember that you're 100.3 WBIG so they can write it down in a diary. But it's really important that they know what to tune to on the radio, who you're listening to. So the brand is really everything. And powerful brands and successful brands, they understand what the listeners need, they understand what they want, and they consistently provide that. They say, this is what we do, and you do it. They're innovating all the time. They're trying to meet the changing needs of their listeners. They're marketing themselves to new listeners. That's another huge thing. If at its base, cume is always going to go down, right? People move away, people pass away, their preferences change.
People age out. Age out of the
If you
demos.
want to stay in the 25-54, absolutely, which is a whole another discussion that we could have about, the value of 55 to 64-year-olds as compared to the value of today's 25 to 34-year-olds in terms of spending power. But again, that's a totally different topic.
Yeah.
So, if there's not only do their preferences change, but there's greater competition for their time than ever before. So the top brands have to market to generate that new cume and also figure out ways to market to their existing cume. We call it recycling, right? If you listen in the mornings, get them to listen another time during the day. If they listen on Mondays, get them to come back on Tuesday. If they listen on the weekdays, get them to come on the weekends and vice versa. So all kinds of recycling to increase your time spent listening. And that's the self-promotion promotion on the air that you can do. But to generate cume, you have to market off air.
Yeah, and I like what you said in there about innovating and evolving, because I think there's this opinion that, once you get to that number one slot, you can kind of rest easy. And that's absolutely not the case, because you don't know what everyone around you is doing and what they're going to do and what changes they might make and how the audience, like you said, might be changing. So if you're not
everybody
constantly
wants to take down the number
Yeah.
one. Sports and radio stations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The another one I saw in there that I liked was about celebrate your listeners article. That it resonated with me because I'm a big believer in the outsized value of super listeners, like I mentioned earlier. That blog also talked about qualitative data to see what stage of life your listeners are in, which this really applies on the sales side. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so what we were trying to do with that blog is show how the lifestyle category in Scarborough or Media Audit, in the qualitative information, it can help you better engage with your listeners. When you know more about your listeners, you can increase that engagement by talking about things that matter to them. For example, if they're planning to have a child or get married in the next year, if you know that a sizable portion of your audience is planning to do something like that, you can talk about it on the air. You can even provide advertising. I always say the difference between advertising and information is that advertising is for something I don't want and information is for something that I do. So if I'm getting married and there's stuff about, wedding cake providers or other kinds of services that I need to plan my wedding, then that's information. That's no longer advertising.
Right. The I 100% agree with the point from the What is a Quarter Hour article about how people don't live their life by the rigid standards of, top of the hour to 15 after to 30 after, and so on. Do you think radio tries a little too hard to program to Nielsen instead of listener habits?
I'm not sure if I would say it that way. For better or worse, Nielsen is our currency,
Hmm.
and it's one component of the revenue for most radio stations. Not everybody uses it. So I think understanding the intricacies of Nielsen is really important. You can't just ignore it and expect to be successful.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, if you're running a business, you need to operate at a high level in every facet of your business. And if there's research that says that it's most effective to run these longer stop sets at 15 and 45, are we really smart to ignore that? On the flip side, you really do need the best content between those stop sets. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to make your station better just by putting your stop sets at 12 and 42 on the hour. You still have to have great content that engages with your listeners, and those basics haven't changed. So what I would say is know your listeners, play the music they want to hear, or talk about the topics that interest them, and you have the basics for success. And I would say don't get to go back to the answer we had before about worrying too much or overreacting. Don't overreact, but analyze and understand. That's what's important.
Well, that's a good point because if the listener habits are drastically different than how we're programming, I mean that's going to come out in the Nielsen anyway. Like if people are getting to work at a slightly different time and leaving work at a slightly different time in your market than in other markets, that's going to be played out in the data that you're analyzing anyway.
Right.
So I know today's probably not the best day to talk to you about this because yesterday was rough. We're recording this on a Monday, and yesterday was rough for Giants fans. But who will end up with a better regular season record this year, my Dallas Cowboys or your New York Giants?
Like you said, a very unfair day to ask that question, but maybe it's easier to answer today than it was
true.
yesterday. So I have a saying that the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is experience. And I'm a very experienced New York Football Giants fan, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be last in the division, but we will make sure we win enough games that we don't get a good draft pick, a good enough draft to get a franchise-changing quarterback. That's our story.
Yeah,
we'll be number 6 in the draft instead of number 2, and we'll get a Daniel Jones instead. Sorry,
Did you watch the off-season Hard Knocks on the Giants?
I did.
Yes, I did. And I really
thing.
Yeah, the Saquon thing was obviously the lead story in that. But as a Cowboys fan, I wanted to dislike the GM, but he came across like a smart guy, a nice guy, and you really just felt bad for him because it's a really I mean, here's the best player on your team, but you've got all these other pieces, and everyone knows you can't pay a running back too much because they have a short shelf life, unfortunately. So I felt bad for the guy, but I thought he definitely seemed like a smart football guy.
Yeah, and obviously he was involved in the Bills organization, and the Bills organization is a really strong organization. So hopefully he can do the same thing for the Giants. But I think this year the Cowboys will have a better record.
Yeah, I think it could. Washington is actually looking like a much better team than.
Well,
I
they
just
had
wonder.
a number 2 pick. So.
Yeah, there you go. It comes back to. See, that's the challenge with you data guys. You analyze all this, and it's got to make it a little hard to watch sports, though, doesn't it?
So it's funny because I am a data-based decision maker. So when they say, I'm also unfortunately a Mets fan today, and when they say, "Oh, Pete Alonso, will he be back?" and I just look at the numbers. I think he's great. I love the guy. I would love for him to be a Mets fan, but you're not going to pay him Shohei Ohtani money. Or even Aaron Judge money or Juan Soto money. I mean, he's good, but if that's what his agent asks for, I could understand if they said, "Nah, we're going to take a pass." As long as he doesn't go play for the Phillies.
Yeah,
sorry,
like you guys giving Barkley to the Eagles. I mean, that made me mad on so many levels. But yeah, that's why I never fault these players for taking the money because it's like, you got to look out. You only get so long in sports, and you got to look out for yourself a little bit. But thank you so much for your time. I really love having your expertise on all this Nielsen stuff because it's such a a hot topic, but at some point I'd love to have you back on as well.
I'd love to. This was great. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Marc.
Take care.
Radio Influencers is a radio update production. New episodes are released on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.